questions that you planned and asked and the teacher's responses. Again, just bulleted your notes on those, not complete sentences, not paragraphs, because I do have the video as well. You're also going to include the teacher rubric, and you're going to use your district's rubric. So if your district uses Danielson, you're going to use the Danielson for the project. Same for, Amy's going to use Marzano. Those of you that use NYSET, you're going to use NYSET, and you're going to score the rubric, and wherever you are scoring the rubric, you're going to also detail the evidence that you used to make the determination to score the teacher at the level that you did. And I'll show you some examples of this, because I know in many of your districts, all of that connection of the score and the evidence occurs electronically. And I know that you don't have access to that. And so I'm going to show you two different ways that people have done this, and you can determine what is going to work best for you. I'm also encouraging you to take a look at the rubric in its totality. And the reason that I'm asking you to do that is because I know that, for instance, in domain 1 and in the first section of domain 1 of Danielson and the first section of Marzano, that's all about planning. You're not going to see that in the observation, but there may be some pre-conference evidence that you have that you could link to some rubric elements for that. So you might not be able to score everything, but I'm asking you to look at it. And again, I'll show you how you can document some of that. You're also going to include a formal observation summary, and I'm going to show you and explain the various parts of that. But then the last piece will be any other documents that you believe would be helpful to understanding the lesson and the conversation and so on. So, and again, I have an example of this, but sometimes people will include documentation that the teacher gave to you. So sometimes teachers bring, here's some materials I'm going to use in the lesson or that students are going to be using. You could include that as part of your package. It's not required, but if a teacher gives it to you and you think it helps to illuminate things, you can definitely include it. So before I go on to the observation summary, any questions on this list of component parts?
Tamara, I just had a question. So if I'm looking at the NYSET rubric, will I only be focusing on like element 3 for instructional practice and element 4, or standard 4, like you have in Blackboard?
No, you're going to look at the whole thing. Chances are the bulk of your evidence is going to be in standard 3, standard 4, but you might also have evidence in standard 5, depending on if the teacher does a formative assessment, let's say. Okay, you might be able to pull some evidence from your pre-conference around teacher planning for standard 1 or 2. It's not likely, but I'm leaving it open that you might be able to score something there. Okay, so I don't want you to just limit it to the standards, but I know that the preponderance of evidence is going to be there.
But is it okay? So if I'm looking at standard 3.1, for example, there's 2 indicators, 3.2, there's 5 indicators. Is it okay to not score if we don't have evidence?
Yes, if you don't have evidence, you're not going to make something up. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So thank you for clarifying that. And then what you're going to note for me is, either NA or no evidence to support.
Okay.
Right. Because also, I appreciate you bringing this up. You want to be careful that if you have a piece of evidence, that you don't use it in for 5 or 6 different elements.
Yeah,
right?
I wondered about, so no repetition of the same evidence.
I mean, you might be able to use it in 2 different places, but you can get yourself in trouble because of just using one piece of evidence multiple times. Because really to score a piece, we say when I've done trainings with leaders, I say you need 3 to 4 to 5 pieces of evidence for an area in order to really be able to support your score, right? So, and you'll also want to be thinking about collecting a balance of, and this is hard. I want you to know going into this is your first time. I get it. And I take that into account when I score this. This is not, this is a summative assessment for the class, but it's a formative assessment for you moving forward, right? And that's how I treat the feedback conference. So you're going to experiment with gathering teacher evidence during the observation and student evidence. And that balance is going to help you, I think, when you score the rubric.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions before we go on to the next slide?
For the pre-conference, you said to have the video, the script, and the highlighted standards, and then you said you can write up a reflection and identify data charts. Is that something? Don't include that.
No, you don't. No, it's not a requirement to do it. What I was saying is that we may talk about it in our feedback conference, and you're going to do it, right? You're going to reflect afterwards because it's going to make a difference about how you go into the observation, what you're looking for in the data charts. You may think you're going to use, but you don't have to write it up for me. If we weren't going to talk, I would have you write it up, but you're not going. You don't need to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Anything else?
One more question, Tamara. So if I print off the rubric, where am I going to write that evidence? Do you just want an extra sheet of paper that just says, indicator 3.1C? Because there's not enough room, obviously, in the rubric itself.
No, and so I'm going to show you a way you can do it, or you can do exactly what you just said, Carrie. You can have the rubric with the score and then have another sheet that, has a little heading and then your evidence underneath it. I know it's tricky because you're not in a system and the rubric isn't set up to put the evidence right on it. Okay, I'm going to move forward, but certainly ask more questions as they pop into your heads. So the formal observation summary includes these parts, and you're going to see some examples. So first, you're going to have the heading, so that I have your name, the name of the teacher, when you observed, the grade level you observed, the content area, and the time of the observation. And then you're going to include just a quick synopsis of the lesson, meaning what were the learning targets or the objectives that the teacher gave you, and the standards that the teacher highlighted for you. The next section is the background. So the background can be some of the overview that the teacher gave you of the class, meaning the student makeup, and what you were going to see, which kind of bleeds into an overview of the observation. The overview of the observation is basically a summary of what you saw during the time that you were in the classroom. You don't have to provide all the evidence. It's just an overview. This was the learning target. Here's what I saw happen in the lesson. The teacher did a mini lesson. Students worked in groups focused on X, Y, and Z. It just kind of giving a quick summary of each of the component parts of the lesson. You're also going to include, so this is a separate sheets, right? Any data charts and evidence that you collected. Then you're going to include a description of the strengths that the teacher had based upon the evidence. And you want to think about these strengths are identified because remember, this is what you want to have the teacher continue to do. And we had this conversation when we debriefed last week of, thinking about focusing on those big rock areas so that you don't get mired in feeling that you have to acknowledge every single strength that the teacher demonstrated during the lesson. The other part you're going to include is the areas for continuous growth or improvement, and these should be linked to the data charts and based on the scripted evidence. And then you're going to close this observation summary by basically saying, I'm going to support you around X by doing Y. And then you're going to tell the teacher, I'm going to check back with you and do X, Y, and Z, whatever that is. I'm going to do a walkthrough. We're going to meet again after the teacher has done something, which might be she's just experimenting in the classroom, or he's going to, going to do something after the faculty meeting. Whatever that is, that's that accountability piece that we talked about last week. And then the last thing is a place for you to sign and date and the teacher to sign and date. And you can say that just like you would in a real pre-conference or a real post-conference. If you have this cadence in your district, I want you to go away and think about this. If you have questions, you can reach back out to me. And can you sign this and get it back to me by Friday? Making it up. And then that's something that you work with your secretary on, right? To make sure that you continue have that paper flow if the teacher forgets or it falls off your radar.
Tamara, the strengths and continuous growth, can we use our pluses and deltas chart for that? And then underneath it, like write how it aligns to the evidence, or do you want it in something different?
I'm going to show you what I want it to look like. So Pam, I would say use the pluses and deltas chart for your own processing. But then when you write it up for me, I'm going to show you what it should look like. Okay. So I'm going to pull up some examples for you. And just so you know, the first example I'm going to share with you is I'm going to share with you Jessica's, because you saw her post conference, and so I want you to kind of think about what you saw and now how she wrote this up. And I'll explain to you that Jessica turned this in two separate PDF documents, and I don't have strict requirements around how this comes in to me. It's really what's going to make the most sense for you, as long as I can figure it out. Okay, that's how I'll leave it for you. All right. So Jessica did it in two documents. I have another one that I'll show you that's all in one PDF. So let me take you through Jessica's. So what Jessica did was she had a cover page